Hey, this is how you tune your Sayodevice O3C with all the hardware and software that you would need for Geometry Dash specifically. So first, I'd like to go very quickly over the hardware. Firstly, the cord. The stock cord works fine. Otherwise, I would recommend a USB certified device, but that's USB-C to USB-A, or USB-C to USB-C. And cable length doesn't really matter. I know the best cords are usually like 3 feet long, but I don't think it'll make much of a difference as long as it gets from point A to point B and reads at the correct speed. So, and now we have the switches for the Sayodevice. For switch recommendations, I would take a look into finding a switch with low-ish bottom out, like 3.2 or 3.5. 4 is fine, but personally I find that lower bottom out helps me. But if you really want like 4mm depression switches, then sure, that doesn't really affect it too much. But I would personally recommend the lower profile switches because that helps me. And for some recommendations, the KOM, POM switches and the Everglide Wukongs and the Gatoron Spark switches, which the Gatoron Sparks are what I'm using right now. Those have a 3.2mm bottom out. And one thing that these switches have that the switches in the previous video that I will leave unlisted in the description don't have is mitigations against a phenomenon called stem wobbling, which basically moves the magnet inside of the stem, and that messes up Hall effect readings. You can get either of those 3 different types of key switches off of Amazon or AliExpress, whatever is most convenient and most cheap for you. I'm going to try to examine only the necessary stuff because something new alongside the new firmware and alongside some new options is that the device now has a documentation where you can learn about all of the different things, and I will leave this linked in the description as well. So if there is a particular question that is that can be answered by this documentation and doesn't pertain to GD and more like the hardware of this, this does a pretty good job documenting everything from like rapid trigger to Hall effects and all of these different features do. But I'm gonna just cut to the gist, get into the real meat and potatoes, and recommend stuff that you should do to make sure that your thing is running as fast as you can, or as fast as it can go, while also still being fairly accurate. So what you're gonna do first is go to app.sayodevice.com. And if there is a firmware update, if you're running the nightly version or the stable version, it'll be in this top right corner here, and you'd click it and do all of the settings, and it would flash the bootloader with the new firmware. I'm running the nightly version. And if it says enable fast mode, then you're going to want to do that. So first, the binding. Geometry Dash usually uses 2 keys, space and up. I have these set whatever way I prefer personally. Like I like clicking this one now, and I have the knob attachment off, so I can click this one. Next up, for advanced key, something that could be worth exploring is this SOCD feature, and I have that set to my 2 keys that are here and here that I would like to use. And I have this set on last input priority, so if I press one key after the other, then the next input goes in and the other one goes away. This isn't really necessary, and something I would recommend experimenting with so that you could find the best result for yourself. For analog key, this is where a lot of people would get confused, as this is a fairly complicated interface, but it should make a good deal of sense by the end of this video. So first things first, the stroke thing here is for how far down your switch goes. So when you buy your switch, you will see a specification that says bottom out depth, and that will usually be described in millimeters. So it'll either be something like 4 or 3.6, or for these gate-around sparks that I have, 3.2. And this tells the computer inside of the Sayodevice how far the switch goes down, so it can do all of the math for setting all of these parameters to make sure that the switch works correctly. The next thing is this release and trigger option. This sets the parameters for when a release and when a trigger can happen. This release key thing cannot be overlapping with the trigger thing, but trigger can be less than release, which is a little bit weird considering that I don't see much of a use of a middle dead zone to see where this is triggered. But if you want to make a fixed actuation point that releases and triggers at the same point, I would recommend keeping these the same. I personally have this on 0.21 because if not, there's going to be key chattering for me, and generally 2.21 is a fine parameter to have. Next, to quickly cover rapid trigger, which is probably the most complicated thing about this device. First, you would need to turn RT mode on, and if you want a fixed actuation point, like how this would be, just leave RT mode off and keep the parameters as they are. And there are a couple of options here, including this full stroke. If you turn off full stroke, then you can set parameters for where this rapid trigger function is allowed. Otherwise, you can enable it for the full stroke. And for these RT trigger and RT release values, basically it tells you if you are in the middle of a switch press, like if I press my switch down here and I decide to release the switch, how far must that switch travel in order to release itself? And the answer is this parameter here, 0.15 that I've set here. And the rapid trigger is if I'm in the middle of a keystroke and I release, how far must the switch go down in order to start a trigger? And finally, if you have full stroke enabled, RT match, basically it says in the documentation, but this counts down, or this activates a small timer in the motherboard update process, and for a select period of time, the Sayodevice tries to ignore key switch chattering. I found that setting it to 50 works for me, but your switches are different, and honestly, this technology is quite unstable because of the nature of magnets and how you're using this device. So you're going to need to maybe adjust it so that you don't get extra debounce or switch chattering, or there's no so maybe you'll need to adjust it so that you don't get like double clicks or any of that key switch chattering. So let's move on to device options. And as you can see, I'm on the nightly firmware, but if you for some reason feel like the stable firmware version would be better for you, I've been using the nightly firmware for as long as it's been out, and I've been using previously nightly features, and they all seem relatively stable for what this device is supposed to be used for, or what we are going to be intending it to be used for. For the PC screen area, you're not going to be setting any of your buttons to absolute mouse, because if you set any of your buttons to mouse, it adds a ton of debounce, like a lot of debounce. So double check if you have keyboard binding and you have these key modes here. Make sure it is set to keyboard. You must make sure it is set to keyboard, because if it is not set to keyboard, then it is likely that, or default for if the default option is a keyboard option, but I would set it to keyboard just in case. Keyboard definitely has the lowest debounce and will give you the most accuracy on your releases, where mouse will just add a specified amount of delay, which I'm not sure what that is, to there. For some reason, it really baffles me that it does that for mice things specifically. For USB speed, set it to the highest it can go, 8,000 Hertz, which is another reason why you probably bought this device. And that will also benefit people who use click between frames, because that is dependent on device polling rate. For human interface device features, mouse and media are pretty much what you would need. I don't even think you need mouse. For release delay, I would set that as low as you possibly can. So 1, the keyboard layout. Honestly, it just depends on what language your keyboard is in. And for multi-sampling, since the polling rate is at 8,000 Hz and the internal sample rate is at 16,000 Hz, then it is probably worth setting it to 2 or 1, just so that the inputs are definitely picked up. Finally, let's go over some common causes of double clicking. So the main culprit is key switch chattering. And what key switch chattering is let me go to test device, or let me go to analog key. If you see this thing down here, you'll see that if I were to zoom in here, after I press the switch down, there is a little bit of extra noise here. This specific problem, although I was releasing the switch really quickly so that it would snap down rather than how I would normally release the switch, this is key switch chattering because when the switch moves back up, it comes in with force to the top of the shell holding, and it bounces back down because the energy has nowhere else to go. And that's generally what causes double clicks. Or the readings are just picking up like any excess noise, like how I just weirdly press my switch and then for some reason this doesn't register that it's at the top of the switch for some reason. And the reason for like unreasonable spam or jitter clicking could be because of that. So one way to prevent noise is to increase this RT match value a little bit higher, and that turns on that sample timer, or that sample rate timer, to ignore any chattering for that specific thing. The second thing could be that your RT trigger and RT release are set too low or lower than the recommended value. If you think that it could be better, then I don't know, but just beware, if you set it lower, then it could cause some noise or key switch chattering issues. And another solution is to set this top dead zone a little bit lower, because I'm looking at my space key. If I just release it so that it does another click, you see how low that is. So if you try putting release at 0.25, as you can see, when I do the same thing, you see that little bump. It doesn't read because this top dead zone, this top release dead zone, is a little bit lower than what is allowed for that input to be made. What's also really nifty about the Sayodevice is that you can create backups and restore those backups. So if you want to experiment with different profiles, like you want to experiment with a profile that has RT mode off, or if you want to experiment with the advanced key but have like a physical place to save your work, or there has been research done on something called impact activation, which is a journal article that I will leave in the description as well. If you can't access it, then I don't know, then maybe your library or school will let you access it or buy the article for you, but I believe it's free. And if you want to test that, then hey, you can save a profile for that, or you can save your old profile and then create a new one and then save that one and swap between profiles. And it's pretty simple. And last but certainly not least, I have had this since August 2023, and I've only had one issue, but you will likely run into this issue sooner because of your playtime being higher than mine, since I'm a university student and I don't play this game very much anymore. If you use one of the switch hollows enough, like I used the farthest one on the right for a while, and you replace the switches often enough and you like beat down into it, like I was playing VSC with that switch, then the housing for the switch, or the housing or the walls for the for where the switch goes into will eventually wear down over time. I don't know if it's because it's made of like a cheap plastic or something, but it will wear down, and because of that the key switch won't be stable, and because of that the magnets at the bottom and on the stem won't be stable, and it'll just be super inaccurate, because that's generally just how it works. Because the magnetic flux isn't being read correctly, it doesn't know where the bottom of the switch is because the magnet moved, etc., etc. So you may need to get a new one, or you might be better off getting a Wooting 80HE if you have the money, or if you can get a sponsorship from them somehow. I might see if I can get a Wooting 80HE because, well, one of my switches is no longer usable, and the Razer Huntsman version 2 that I have tends to have interesting consistency for release delay. I still have no idea how I beat Pinewood on that. Anyway, that's it for this video, and I hope everyone finds what they're looking for.